Hi, my name is Patricia Sharp, and I research the effect of positive parent communication on student achievement for high school students. I did my undergraduate at Morningside College, and then I started the graduate program at Morningside in the summer of 2016, and I've been teaching high school math in Sheraton for the past 9 years. So why I chose my topic was I wanted to see how if you increase parental involvement, how that helps increase student achievement. And I noticed that there was a variety of studies that have shown the positive effects of parental involvement. A lot of them focus mostly on parent-teacher conferences and social events where they bring parents to the schools and have a lot of face-to-face meetings with their teachers, which is great. The other thing I noticed is that most of the studies focused on diversities of the student population and not necessarily the type of communication that was happening with the parents. There was there was one good study with Kraft and Rogers that did focus on communication, and it's where I kind of crafted my research from, because it did focus on positive and consistent communication with different types of students. So why I chose to do this research, one of our goals as a staff was to increase our positive communication with parents, and so we were supposed to send a couple emails a week to parents relaying positive information that their student had done in our classroom. So I was curious to see how this affected the student achievement in my class. So some of the major studies that I looked at was that Kraft-Rogers study. It took place at a summer school program, and it focused on contacting parents via phone call, and they contacted both or all parents, but they split the group in half as best as they could, because it's an odd number of groups. But half the parents received a negative communication, and the other half received positive communication. The way that worked was if you have, say, you have two different students and both of them do really well at solving equations and not so well at solving the quadratic formula, if one of the students is in the negative communication group, when they contact their parents, they're going to focus their communication on the quadratic formula, the thing they're struggling with, and they're going to focus on that. But if the other student's in the positive communication group, and when they call their parent, they're going to focus on the solving equations, which is what they do really well. And then what they also showed was that parents who are in the positive information did end up receiving more follow-up calls, and more information was given to them. And so it was a really interesting study. They did say that more further research needed to be done on seeing whether or not phone calls was the best way to communicate, but they did have some interesting results as far as having that positive communication with parents. Another one that really showed that parental involvement helps is a study by Crow. And again, its major thing is diversity and how it showed a major factor in the student achievement. But it did show a major connection with parental involvement and communication and how that can increase student achievement. But again, it offered the idea that further research needed to be done as far as different types of communication and expanding it from just the socioeconomic students that they worked with in this study. The other one that was really interesting was Olmsted's technology study. Again, it suggests that we needed some proactive communication, and then also it said that with our all of our changing technology, that the parental contact and parental involvement will need to change as technology changes. So we need to maybe adjust how we contact our parents and keep them updated on their child's progress in school. So the impact of my research, another study that really showed that parental involvement was able to predict the success of student achievement was Park Holloway's study, and again it focused mostly on diverse students. Another study that kind of crafted my research was at Kraft-Rogers, because it looked at the effectiveness of communication. But again, the gap with both of those was studying the type of the communication and how it has a role of increasing a student achievement. And so what I noticed is that in my research I needed to provide teachers a way to have structured and consistent contact with those parents and guardians in order for it to truly have an effect on student achievement. So then the purpose of my study was to see how that positive, consistent communication affected the student achievement as far as measured by the standardized test of MAP. And I'll talk more about what MAP is here in a little bit. So then my overall hypothesis was students whose parents receive more positive contacts about academics will be more successful in the classroom than those parents who receive minimal contact as measured by their higher RIT scores on their math MAP tests. So then my variables of my study, my independent variable was the email that I sent to my parents in my experimental group, and the dependent variable is the students' ROSH unit score, their IRIT scores from the math MAP test. So my study was a between subject design because I set up two groups. I had a control group and an experimental group. My control group, there was minimal contact with me and their parents. The only contact I had with any of them was set up by the district. We were supposed to contact them during parent-teacher conference time, and also if one of their students or one of their children is failing my class, then I needed to contact them. Otherwise, I didn't have any contact with the control group's parents. And the experimental group, I contacted their parents on a weekly basis for the 12 weeks of my study. So again, the possible impact of my research is to try to help teachers use and utilize that positive parent communication so that it can help increase student achievement as well as parent involvement. So the participants of my study, I used my pre-calculus class. They were juniors. They were about 17 years of age. And then I tried to split them evenly amongst my experimental group, which is nice because I was able to get 15 in each group, and then I tried to keep the females and males pretty equal as well. I did have a conversation with my principal to get permission for my study. He was very intrigued since one of our goals was to increase positive communication, so he was very intrigued with my study. And then no parental contact was required to get permission for this study. So I used the measure of academic progress, or the MAP assessment, which is an online standardized test, and it's a leveled assessment, which means that there's about 50 questions on that test, and then each student gets a variety of different questions based on the Common Core math standards. And so as the students answer questions correctly, they'll get questions that are more difficult, the higher level standard, and if they happen to miss questions, then the questions will start decreasing in difficulty as well. On average, a 17-year-old should be around the 230 to 240 range, so I have a sample question there that uses that graph to help measure the average speed, but I do have the majority of my students in my pre-cal class will score over 250, so I have a sample question there as well to help find the x-intercept of that equation. So a couple more things about the MAP test. It's all on the computer, and we're a one-to-one school, so each student had their own Dell laptop that they took the test on through a lockdown browser provided by the MAP program. Then the MAP test is called the Math 6 Plus IA 2010 version 2, and it says it's from the Iowa Common Core Mathematics. And then, like I said, the RIT score is an equal interval score, and it's independent of the grade level, so it's not like the Iowa assessment where they give you a certain proficiency where you're at, but it's a range, and again, it'll tell you on average where your student should be at what age. but again, the valid range is between 100 and 350. So then the procedure I used for my study was I sent emails home once a week to my experimental group's parents. In the initial email, I gave a little bit more information. I actually even told them like what their initial score on the MAP test was, and it highlighted the areas that they did really well in on the MAP test, and then told them different things that they were doing in my class that was really good at the time. And then each following week, I gave an update email, so I updated them on their positive things that they had been doing the week before, and then also told them some new things throughout each week that they had done. How I measured my achievement is I used the MAP test, which we administered twice. We took it once in the winter before I started sending the emails, and then once in the spring after the emails had concluded. Then I averaged each of their RIT scores, and then I analyzed how that affected each group. So the initial average was actually fairly close. Both of them were around 253, and then I averaged them at the end to see if there was any growth. So what I did find was there was a statistically significant increase on the average RIT scores, as shown by that p-score of less than 0.05 on my table. And again, I had a t-score of negative 2.25, and then the Cohen's d was negative 0.82. So then here's a showing of my average test scores. Like I said, with the experimental group, it did show a significant increase. It went from 253 to 259, and then the control group did decrease slightly. I'm not sure what happened there, but it went from 253 to 251. So what this shows from my study is it did reinforce the idea of parental involvement and its positive effect on student achievement, and that's the same study from before that, Park Holloway. It supported that same idea of parental involvement, and then it also showed great potential of positive communication and how it can affect a student achievement positively. So then a few limitations of my study. I was uncertain whether or not the communication was reaching the parents as intended. I did use the Google Read receipts, but that was very inconsistent whether or not I got those back, and then I didn't always get a return email from those parents to know if I was getting that contact back. So that means I had a very general result. Again, if I had some more communication of which parents were receiving it, I could maybe narrow down my results even more, and so it would be nice to have a more reliable way to track when parents open the emails. So then the other thing that's a limit of my study is small sample size, only 30 students. I think more students would make the results even more valid. And then also the short time frame, especially with parent communication. I think it might be stronger to have it for maybe even a whole year that you have their student versus just a semester. That way you can continue that parent communication right from the beginning of the school year. So recommendations for my future research. So you want to combat the language barrier. That's where maybe the lack of whether or not I know that the parents can understand what my email was saying. So maybe send translated material, or maybe if email is unavailable, send a letter home, or maybe something like that. But again, just another way to track that communication, make sure that it's reaching the intended target. Also, maybe different technology could also play a role in that as well. If parents don't have an email, maybe using a text message, because the majority of them would have a cell phone, or if they don't want to text back and forth with me, there's other apps that allow that type of communication to happen. There's a Remind app, which is actually, you can use it through a smartphone app or a website that gives you a line of communication with somebody. All you have to know is either their email address or a phone number. Or you could set up a social media account that's specifically for teachers, so that you could communicate that way as well. Another way to measure achievement could also be an effect. using Iowa assessments is another standardized test option, or if you don't want the standardized test options, maybe homework completion in the classroom, or maybe an original test that I've written that I can use as my pre and post test. So here are my references, and thank you for listening.